exploring the Genesis connection to the Chinese people. So many of us like to explore our family tree, and as a Christian, we're inspired by evidence that the peoples of the world have their own stories or legends that connect them to Genesis, especially the Great Flood that you can read about in the narrative around Noah in the book of Genesis in the Bible. Now, you might remember that Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Well, today an opportunity to explore the lineage from Ham to the Canaanite people and eventually to the Chinese people. Now, these sorts of connections reinforce the authenticity of the biblical account and affirm Genesis as history. And our special guest today is John Mackay. John is the creation guy, the founder of Creation Research and the Aussie Creation Museum, Jurassic Ark. John Mackay, always a pleasure, but welcome back to 2020.
G'day, Neil, and it's good to be back here.
Hey, John, this is one of these fascinating conversations, and people will often have the thought, well, you know, if Genesis is true and there was a worldwide flood and Noah was there with his ark and he and his sons and their wives, they were preserved, and somehow or other the peoples of the earth came from Noah being preserved through the flood, there must be some ways that we can point to the progression of people groups around the world. This is just one of those sorts of topics and questions that come up when you're talking about creation and evolution.
The last time I was asked it was last night, when a man with sort of olivey brown skin, slanted eyes, and a accent asked me, you know, I'm Asian by extract. I was raised in Borneo. You know, my real name is not this, it's that in Chinese. Where do we come from? How do we fit into all of this? So it's a very, very topical question, because he's become a Christian, but he wants the rest of his family, who is half Buddhist, to become Christians as well, and he wants a way to link them into the gospel. So that's what this is all about, going from Adam through Noah to Ham, Shem and Japheth, and particularly Ham we'll probably concentrate on today, and taking you up to Jesus Christ, who died not for the racial conflicts we have, but for the cause of them, right? The problem of sin in Chinese or Europeans or whatever. So some of the research we've been doing, because the manager of our museum building, he said, I have lots of Chinese businessmen come here. He said, can you do me a big display so I can use it as a launch pad for the gospel? So we've had a real purpose in doing a brand new mural that traces Canaan particularly through one of his offspring, Sinite or Sinem, right, all the way through to the Sinites mentioned in Isaiah chapter 49, which if you look up Strong's Concordance, and most people don't, it says people from the Orient. And yet I've had Europeans say the Chinese aren't mentioned in the Bible. Yes, they are, but not the word Chinese. But then the word Australia isn't mentioned in the Bible either. So you can't say the Australians have nothing to do with Noah's Ark at all. So what you find is, yes, you can go directly from Adam through Noah, through Ham, through Canaan, through Sinem and Sinite, over to the Chinese, and all around and back again. So it's been an exciting project. And so last night at dinner, we could actually answer this guy and give him a way to introduce the whole thing to his relatives.
And, you know, there might be the stories of people groups all over the world, and we would know that some of those have those common stories. You might call them legends, but where they came from, and I know that a lot of those have somewhere in there a great flood and people on a boat who were preserved. So if we can find one of those stories, and we're going to do that today in linking these Chinese connections, we might be encouraged that the authenticity of the biblical account is something we can rely on. This is something, isn't it, that is a blockage for so many people to belief in Jesus, because they wonder whether they can believe the biblical account. These sorts of stories go a long way to helping that happen.
They certainly do. In fact, my grandson was looking through some of my photographic files, and he came across a photo of a young John Mackay, you know, thinner, better looking, of course, more hair. And beside me was a missionary who I first heard about this from. He'd been kicked out of China by the communists, walked out of China, a tough walk, by the way, across the back of the Himalayas there, and ended up in Australia. And I went to listen to him, and he was saying, we have very little trouble communicating with the Chinese because so many of their symbols, and he then showed us a symbol for sacrifice, and it had a lamb draped over an altar. And he said, it's easy to go from there to Adam and sin in the Garden of Eden. And then he went on to tell me for the first time the story of a big boat with 8 people on it, which, by the way, all of this is in Chinese symbols. And, you know, they don't use an alphabet. They use pictures, pictographs. It's why they had to sort of reinvent it for the computer, because there's 170,000 pictures that go to make their whole dictionary up. But he said, here is the boat. See that big square? Yes, well, that's the symbol for mouth. See that little, what looks like a delta thing to us? That's the number 8. And see this down here? That's 8 people on a big boat. And he said the only reason you'd actually have a symbol like that if that was the first boat you saw. And there's only one boat that matches that description. It's in Genesis chapter 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, the Noah.
Okay, let's not leave Aussies out of all of this. And, you know, for long-time listeners, you'll know that we've talked about where Aboriginal peoples have come from and how they got to Australian shores. And a big challenge for people who think that 65,000 years is in question there, because there's a creation way of being able to describe that. And we might get into that, and there might be listeners who have some questions around that. But let's start with some Chinese connections to Australia, and how this might actually be something that connects to this word sign, or S-I-N. Let's talk about that. In fact, there was a gravestone discovered in Victoria. What's the story?
60 years ago. It was discovered by the man who first owned the first backhoe in the area. So he went round digging because it was a much more efficient than pick and shovel and things like that. And on one plot that had never been a cemetery, right, because it's illegal to dig up anything in cemeteries, even the old Chinese cemeteries, right, he found a broken gravestone. And he took it home, cleaned it up a bit, couldn't read it, of course. It was all in Chinese from the 1800s. And eventually his son said, listen, you started a creation museum here in Brisbane. You've got one at Gympie as well, Jurassic Ark. And I'd like you to take this, see if you can find out what it says, and is there any connection that we can make use of? So I got some Chinese students to translate it for me, and it's all about a man from southeastern China, where many of the miners were. You couldn't say they were volunteers, right? It was almost like a gang collected together to come out here, and they would owe their owners money, which they'd send back, which made them unpopular, of course, here in Australia. So there was lots of conflict over the finances. But anyway, we discovered the name of this man, the Chinese man. We discovered where he came from. And you think, this is just on a gravestone. And, of course, the tragedy is that he died here in Australia. We don't know what of, but we've been able to establish where this man came from and tell the Chinese people. And really, this guy's become part of history. And it's over at over at our Creation Museum, going up with a new Chinese display so that people can see, hey, you can connect all of these people groups by migration. So when Moses passed through southern Arabia, he came across a place called Zin. And anyone who's listening can say Zin and Sin are almost the same words, right? And people from Zin were Zinese. Right? Interesting, isn't it? And so by the time you go around the other route and you ask questions like the study at university today of Chinese and Chinese politics is called sinology, S-I-N. Now, sin's in the Bible, and sin's always been associated. Look up Strong's Concordance for S-I-N-I-M, and you find it says people from the Orient. And so sin and sinim, the study of the Sinese people or the Sinese people, became sinology. So we have Sino-American relations, etc. But if you go to China and work backwards, you will find the connection is even more evident because it's recorded in symbols, literature, and language for us, so that in China, the rise of what we would say QIN dynasty, that's because we don't read Chinese, they would call it Qin. So if you were descended from Chin, whose ancestry goes back to about 500 or 700 BC, right, you are a Chinese people. A Chinese is not far from Zinese, which is not far from Sinese, right? And then you can trace it all the way, because you and I know Chinese are notable for one thing here in Australia, trading. Right, they are brilliant traders. They love to buy and sell, and they're really good in that area. And it seems that they went down to India, and the Indians traded with them, and they wrote all this in Sanskrit. So here we have in Sanskrit, and no, I don't read Sanskrit, so I got someone who did. And they said, oh yes, that is Chin. We knew these people as Chin or Chinese. And by the time you get back to Greece and Latin, you then have them, well, you know, Zin, Sin, Chin. And you've got to say, what did they say? And you would say us, we would say, they said Chin, we say Sin, there's no difference, which there isn't technically. And then it gets into our Bible with the S sound, which is the one that Moses would have used. And we now have the Sinese or the Sin, we have Sinai, we have Zin, we have Sin, we have Chin, and you find the whole lot. And the key part here is you are to witness to the China land shopping centres, then you need to know they fit into the Bible picture, and their problem is not the colour of their skin, it's not their slanted eyes, the problem is sin, and the only solution for whatever colour skin you've got is Jesus.
And here we are talking about this and taking us back to a gravestone discovered outside Castlemaine in Victoria. And it connects a Chinese province that we're now saying connects back to the Canaanites.
Yep. And
as you say, back through India. So from the time when the flood happened, and the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, and Noah and his sons and their wives, they got off the ark and they began to live their life and began to spread out into different places. There's a way you can trace that. You've got to go back from current times to then, but that's the way that you can see the way that the progress of populations around the world have developed.
You certainly can, and it's vital to evangelism. People don't realise how people need to know where they came from. So when you have, like one of the most famous anthropologists said, if you're going to change people's history, give them one in replacement, because otherwise you destroy the people. And that's been part of the problem with Aboriginals. And now they've reinvented their own history courtesy of evolution. So their story is, we've been here for 65,000 years, we've always been here. Now, both of those statements are false. That may make me very politically incorrect, but I care more about the Aboriginals coming to Christ, who lived and died 2,000 years ago, for the people who'd been here not all that long before he came to planet Earth. And they need to know the real history of the planet, and you'll find that when you look at their problem, it's not the race issues, it's not land rights, it's not any of those. Again, like the Chinese, it's the problem of sin, and they need a saviour. So forgive me for harping on that, but all of you listening who care for your neighbours who may be different ethnicity than you, you need to find a way to connect them. By the way, the Lebanese, there's a lot of them in Australia, and they fit into this too. They're one of the Canaanites.
Well, you know, and you've mentioned India too, because while we're not talking about India today specifically, when you're talking about the Chin people, back through India, back to the Canaanites. So then anyone who's got an Indian connection here too would also see themselves in the picture when we start to tell this story.
Yes, it certainly is true. Of course, India's been a lot more messed up than places, because you get Alexander the Great coming in with his concepts of, well, you know, the white skin was best. So you go north in India and the biggest selling item is whitening cream for your skin, because Alexander the Great was superior culturally in all of this in their eyes. And then you have a hierarchy introduced, which ultimately becomes embedded in Hinduism and Buddhism and all of that. So you've got to understand the messed upness of that portion of India, but nevertheless coming out of that southern group, because all this introduced wars into India. And I was always fascinated when I was looking and researching the Aboriginals in the north coast of New South Wales, and I wanted to know where they came from. And they said 3 brothers landed on just down the Evans Head, right? One went west, one went north, one went east. We have the 3 brother hills down there. You can see this. It's in their own traditions. And when I asked when this was, they said after we left the middle of the world, after lots of war and fighting, after the big flood. Now, if you have a look at our Origin of Races DVD, which we did, that was our first main documentary, we take you to the Three Brothers Cave. And you learn one thing. You can see them painted there, but they're faded because, I'm sorry, painting doesn't, clay paint doesn't last 46 or 60,000 years. If it did, Dulux would want the formula. So you'll find that all the evidence is there that the story on the coast is right, but the story matches the biblical point. They came after the flood and they came after fighting. And I hate to say this because it doesn't sound too nice, but most people who have explored the world are those who got kicked out.
Okay. John, I want to ask you about what the legends out of China are saying about any connections here to the Genesis flood event. The Miao tribes. Give us an insight here.
Okay. I interviewed a missionary from southern China, northern Vietnamese area, and she recounted all the legends she'd come across that had a biblical parallel. And the Miao people were one of them. And I was interested because I had noticed one thing: you go to North America and the Inuit people are Asian looking. You travel down the west coast, the Native Americans had that sort of slanted eye look and the olivey skin. And I found the same legend in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon was a place where the good God had a daughter who lived, there's no hole there yet, and he put a big log and put her inside it, and a big flood came and carved out the Grand Canyon. And then you go to the Miao people, and they have a story that's basically the same ingredients. There's a good God, there's a bad God, there's a good person, there's bad people, etc. There's judgment, there's water, there's a vessel. So I got our artist to read through this legend and then actually paint it and portray it. So over at our Creation Museum at Archerfield, and we'll have another big open day to display all these new things coming up, but you'll find that there it is, just absolutely beautiful. And the legend is not made up as a fairy story, it's a memory of people who were there at the time, and it's passed down, passed down, passed down. And the big advantage the Chinese and these races have is that unlike many of the Aboriginal nations who lost the ability to write, did you catch what I just said? They lost the ability to write. They were good storytellers, but when you lose the ability to write, your details become vaguer and vaguer. But in China, you find the story of the boat is in the symbol. You find that the story of the flood, the Miao people legends, are so much more precise because they were passed down in a much more reliable way. And you can be grateful out there, you've got a Bible, you can check all the details against the most accurate record of it.
I'm fascinated by the Chinese equivalent to Noah, and you can verify this, the name Nuah, N-U-A-H, and no doubt in Chinese language that's got some similarity to the Noah that we think of.
There's no doubt about this is a common feature all around the world. So if you go to Egypt, right, I spent quite a bit of money with the British Museum displays on Egypt because they charged me £1,000 an hour to film it. That's in 20 years ago money. So you could actually learn that Nuah, right, N-U, was the ancient Egyptian god of the water. And he rose up out of the water along with his 8 helpers, or 7 helpers, right, in a big boat. And you say, well, here's Nu in Egypt, there's Noah in Israel. You come to England and it's N-O-E. That's how it got into English language. And by the time you get back down to India, where we know the people in the Middle East traded, you find it's Nu, and the same is true for the Miao people. And then when you go across the middle of the desert through Mongolia, desert today, that is, cold desert, you get to China, and it's a similar story, a similar name, similar sound. And as my missionary friend who introduced me to this 40-something years ago said, John, it's just in your lap. You can preach the gospel from there. You Chinese people are descended from Noah, same as I am.
Well, let's take some calls. 1-800-316-316. And John Mackay, our special guest, we're talking about the connection for the Chinese people today, back through India, back to the Canaanites, and then back to one of the sons of Noah, the son Ham. 1-800-316-316. Let's take a call. Andrew is in Springwood in Queensland. Hey, Andrew, welcome along.
Thank you very much for speaking to me this morning, Neil. And thank you, John.
Pleasure, mate.
What are your thoughts, Andrew?
My thoughts were initially, and it's I don't know if it's Providence or not, but I actually watched a YouTube video on this only within the last week.
Mm-hmm.
My interest being because my wife is Taiwanese.
Uh-huh.
And we've been trying to look at ways of connecting with her family who are of Buddhist background. And I thought, well, maybe I can draw some sort of connection. And it was exactly what you're talking about. Now, my first question was, because, or observation, I should say, is that the wars that happened in China with Japan were called the Sino-Chinese Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Which is obviously very similar to what.
Yeah, Sino-Japanese Wars. That's correct. They were.
So that there gives an automatic identification to the heritage or the lineage of the Chinese.
There is no doubt about it that they acknowledge this themselves. In fact, what I did was I went all the way through the biblical records, traced the Hebrew, I traced the Greek Septuagint, I traced the Old English, I traced the Modern English, and in every case you end up with sin or zin or sinim or sinite, right? And then I thought, I will take Isaiah chapter 49 and verse 12, in which the word sinim appears, and then check the Chinese language Bible, because there's now an authorized version, and see what they do with that word, right? So when you get to that word, they have the symbol for QIN, which is China. Right, so the Chinese government actually puts themselves in the Bible, or approves the translators doing that. So you've made an absolutely correct understanding of that. But when you throw Japan into the mix, you've got to remember there are 2 or 3 invasions of Japan up to the present day, and China trying to take Japan or Japan trying to take China. This is an old war, and that war probably dates to the fact that, well, an old group of Chinese told me they come from rebellious youth. We kicked and sent off the island and told them never to come back. So there's long-standing recrimination there. But there's the Ainu in the north, who are probably from northeast India, and they are lighter in skin, it's not the standard Asian-looking, totally separate culture, so you have to deal separately with them. But your wife is one of the groups that's gone down south. So come out of India probably and across there, and they will have an Indian-type background mixed with the Chinese legend. So you're keep connecting the dots, and you'll find a way to actually say, oh, Holy Spirit, put the words in my mouth that this person needs to hear, because here's your problem with Buddhism. Buddhism is really nihilism. Right, don't think. Shut your brain down. It's different from Hinduism. Hinduism has a triad of gods at the top, and then each god becomes a separate character, so you end up with hundreds of millions. Buddhism ends up with nobody and nothing and nihilistic. So that will be your biggest obstacle. So well, that's why, medical missions have done so well with Buddhists, because break your leg, you still hurt. You can't end up turning it away. So pray for real wisdom in dealing with Buddhists.
Andrew, you had something further to add very quickly. I'm about to go to news. We won't have time to respond now. But what was very, very quickly, what was your second point?
My second point was a question. Because of Buddhism and their desire to look at their ancestry, I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, that identifying the ancestry through to Noah is a good way of approaching. So you're not from, if you want to look at your ancestry, this is where it is.
Yes,
okay.
That's a very good technique.
I'm going to have to break in. The news won't wait for us, but we'll see if we can follow through something on that after news. But Andrew, thank you so much for your call. Now, John, just quickly, before we take a call, you've got a seminar, and you're going to be dealing with some of these sorts of things coming up on the 20th and 21st of April in Gales on the western side of Brisbane towards Ipswich. This is the sort of thing that will come out prominently in that seminar?
It certainly is. The organiser said, we want to deal with how did the Aborigines get here and all the issues associated with it. Where do they fit into Noah? And, of course, we'll do the Chinese and as many other things as we can in the 2 days. So it's Saturday the 20th in the afternoon and evening, Sunday in the morning and the afternoon. So it's 20th, 21st, and it's out at the Chimera Assembly. Right, I'll repeat that, Chimera Assembly. If you're good at remembering addresses, you can remember this, 90 Old Logan Road, or you can go to our website, probably by the end of the week it'll be all up. We've got a new website, same address, but it's all nicely upgraded and everything. So that's at Camira Assembly on the 20th and 21st, dealing with the origin of Aboriginal people. There'll be myself speaking. There'll be Dr. Diane Eager, who's been on the radio here. She'll be talking about how many people got slanted eyes to give rise to the Chinese, because isn't that the most big difference Europeans see? They ask how come their eyes are so different, and you'll find that a great fact that comes out that probably only one family had that change, and then they all gave rise to the millions and millions of people we regard as Asian or Chinese today. So all of those things, the history of Australia, the history of Aborigines, myself, Diane Eager, John Osgood, etc. on the 20th and 21st.
We are taking calls on 1-800-316-316. Let's hear from Michael in Maruya in New South Wales. Hey, Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Neil and John.
G'day, mate.
What are your thoughts, Michael?
Well, I understand we're all descended from the one pair of parents, one woman and man, Adam and Eve. And so how come there's different nations have different coloured people and people with different shaped eyes and that, if we all came from the same parents? And in that case, what did Adam and Eve look like? What colour were they?
Okay, good question. The Apostle Paul is adamant in Acts chapter 17. If you remember the context, he was talking to pagans, Greek academics. It's the first university lecture recorded in the Bible. He wasn't talking to the ordinary person. He was talking to the academic leaders of Greece, who, as the scripture says, discussed nothing else except what was new under the sun and discarded it just as quickly. But Paul makes the comment in chapter 17, God has made all nations from one flesh, right? And he proceeds to preach the gospel back to Adam, that they were all descended from Adam. The real problem is sin, and the last Adam, Jesus. So this is the connection that we need to make, and it's quite biblical. You've asked a good question. What did Adam and Eve look like? How come we're different colours, etc.? How come some people have, well, you know, Bruce Lee and all the others, you look at them and say, well, they are Asiatic. You look at me and you say, I'm not Asiatic, or I'm Anglo, whatever. So anyway, there are noticeable differences, and the isolation of those differences has led to reinforcing them. So when Europeans first went to China, their basic comment was, don't they all look funny? And of course, the Chinese people said, don't they all look funny? And we got so used to what we were looking for. But here's the difference between the Chinese eyes and the Europeans' eyes. If you go to a mirror and you look halfway up, particularly when you are starting to age and you are putting perhaps a bit more fat on than you normally should, you find you build up fat in the top half of your eyelid. Now, the Chinese, the Asian races have basically twice as much fat in the top half of the eyelid. Now, it's not that you don't have fat and they do, they just have more than you. Now, if you want to know what building up fat does, look at your stomach. As you are young and lean like I was, you don't have any folds or whatever, but the more weight you put on, the more it hangs out and gravity folds it over. Now, the same is true with your eyelid. So you'll find that you're looking at the results of a gene which is probably busted to control the amount of fat, and it pulls the shape of the eyelid. So if you look at your stomach, excess fat changes your shape. It's as simple as that. And now people can say, oh, they evolved fatty eyelids because they walked through the cold mountains of Tibet. No, if they didn't have that fat there, their eyeballs perhaps would have frozen anyway. So you can say it's been selected for as they travelled, but nevertheless it can still be traceably back to one family who left Zin or Sin or one of those places in the Arabian Peninsula after Babel and travelled eastward, which is where Strong's Concordance said these are the people from the east. So you can tie it all together, and the features such as skin colour. You want to know why some people are black and some people are white? Well, you come and have a look at John Mackay, the creation guy, who's also of Scottish ancestry. Now, I have brown pigment in my skin, I have pink, I have white, I have dark, I have black. I'm the United Nations on one arm, as I keep telling people, because my skin controls a shot. Now, it's not the world's best skin colour, because some parts of me burn like crazy. Other parts tan too much, so I end up looking like a spotted cheetah sometimes. But in reality, it's to do with how evenly your skin colour, pigment, melanin particularly is distributed. So that's number one. We are all brown. We're either more brown or less brown. Some people make too much of it and it comes to the top. Other people make hardly any and it stays down the bottom. They're the white people versus the black people. And then there's the brown people in the middle. Then there's John Mackay, the guy with freckles all over his arm. By the way, my dad was a Scotsman, came from cold old Scotland, and he didn't know he had freckles till he got to Australia.
There you go.
They didn't show up. Yeah.
Michael, I hope that has answered your question. Michael in Maruya, thank you so much for your call. And we're taking calls on 1-800-316-316. Let's take another one. Graham is in Orange in New South Wales. Hey, Graham, welcome.
Hello, Neil. Bless you.
Bless you too, Graham. What are your thoughts for our conversation?
Well, it's interesting that John just spoke about his Scottish history because my surname's Scottish, McLennan, and we can trace our ancestry back to Adam and Eve. And it's interesting because it talks about Seth and Enoch and Noah and Gomer and a number of people like Gomer in Genesis 10:2, with how the Noah's children developed, and of course we're the children coming from Japheth, but there are about 20-odd ancestries or dynasties in Europe that can trace their ancestry back right through to Adam and Eve. And of course, it wasn't through those two guys who had a fight, Cain and Abel. It was through Seth that our descendancy and ancestors came out of. But I'd just like to say that it's very interesting to have our history and to see where we've come from. And that's very important, I think. And the fact that Japheth moved westward. Ham moved eastward, and Seth moved south. But we moved westward, and I came from the King of Spain and 60-odd kings of Ireland and so on. But it's a very interesting history. One of them was, of course, brought the gospel to Scotland, and that was Columba. He's a saint. You know, he's not a king as a saint. So it's very interesting, I think, that we know our history. Karl Marx said that those who do not know their history can be easily persuaded. And I think that's very important, don't you think, John?
Well, it certainly is. Like Hitler took that same philosophy and to invent a new history for Germany, he deliberately destroyed the old one. Right, so by bringing in evolution and some of these ideas, that's what the communists did, got rid of the traditional Christian view of Europe, and once you destroy a people's history, you've destroyed the people unless you give them a new history. We all need to know a history, but the devil knows if he can give you a false history, he's got you. If we tell the Aborigines they've been here for 65,000 years, they have no relationship to Noah, and no relationship to Noah, they aren't connected to Adam, they have no problem called sin, so the gospel is cut off for them. So the point you've made is a very good one. So don't run away from your history. It may be embarrassing. You may have convicts in your history or whatever, but in reality you need to have an idea and you need to share it with people, whether you can trace them to Ham, Shem or Japheth. We all go through Noah, all the way back to Adam, so it's important that we connect to sin, which connects to our Saviour.
And great to hear from Graham McLennan today, and some listeners will know that name. Graham leads the National Alliance of Christian Leaders and also Christian Heritage Research.
Yep,
so Graham, right into the history there. Graham, thank you so much for your call.
Good on you, Neil. Listen.
We're taking calls 1-800-316-316. Join in our conversation. Let's hear another one. Bridget is in Albany in WA. Hey, Bridget, welcome.
Hi, how you going?
Very good. What are your thoughts?
Well, I just had a question for John, or a couple of things really. First of all, what are his thoughts around the Nephilim helping to build the pyramids and those huge structures around the world, the monoliths or is it whatever? And then the second thing is, if that was a possibility, how does that fit into the timeline with the flood? Would they have been all wiped out, or did the Noah and his family carry the DNA for giants to exist after the flood?
Okay, you are definitely crossing boundaries here in all directions, so let's sort of help you just a little bit. One of the things that we found very helpful in doing this Chinese project, which was suggested by the manager of the building where we use for our Creation Museum, he said, I've got Chinese businessmen, they need to be able to see where they fit in. Now, when you're looking at the issues of Egyptian pyramids, who built them, etc. There's no doubt about it that the stones themselves are made of fossils, right? And they're fossils of Nummelites, which are huge compared to what eventually happened to the Nummelites. So you'll find that they come from a world that was better for us, better for them, where they could grow bigger. So if you're asking about giants, you've got to start with the giant fossils first, and they are all flood deposits, right? So the stones for the pyramid definitely go back to the time before the flood. And there is no evidence those stones have ever been underwater since. Now, there's no doubt about Egypt sort of coming into the Roman Empire was the breadbasket of Europe at the time. It was much greener than it is now, and so much of the denudation of Egypt and all along the top of Africa you can blame on human poor management, right? As well as climate change and things like that. But the pyramids have stood and untouched by water since they were first dug up and put down. Now, as to the Nephilim, we need to sort out just a couple of issues, and I'd encourage you to go online to creationresearch.net, click on Q&A. We have questions on giants. We have questions on Nephilim, but they're all no Q&A one. Just a brief one, because I do an hour-and-a-half talk on this by itself. You will find that the word Nephilim first shows up in Genesis chapter 6, where it says there were giants on the land in those days and also after that. But the word for giants is Nephilim. You will also notice a trend in modern translations not to use the word giants. They just put the standard Hebrew word Nephilim in and leave it at that. Because in reality, when you look at the first giants in Genesis chapter 6, you haven't got a clue how big they were. You really don't know. So you don't know they were giants, so hence the translators are leaving that word out. By the time you get to Numbers chapter 13, where it describes the giants again, and it tells there were giant grapes, there were giant all sorts of things, and the spies are so scared they won't go in and take over. You go a little bit further, and you find that by the time of King David, the last of the giants is killed off, right? So they really have no historical connection apart from totally abstract science fiction, the nicest way of saying they built the pyramids. So they really aren't, the two things aren't connected. For more information, go to creationresearch.net, click on giants.
Bridget, I hope that's answered your question. Thank you so much for calling through. 1-800-316-316. Let's take another call. Ty is in Karratha in WA. Hey, Ty, welcome.
Hello, Neil. Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
What are your thoughts here, Ty?
I'm actually back again. I wanted to know if I could get information from the website about the Garden of Eden before the flood, if it's connected to the Philippine Islands. Oh, yeah, Philippines. There's a connection there. Okay. I just wondered.
Yeah, no, it's a good wondering, because we've had that question in many ways. Is the Garden of Eden still here? Is it in the Middle East? The fact that they call some of the rivers the same name, does that mean it's still there, just remnant? Now, what you find is Peter is your best clue, because when Peter talks about Noah lived in a time when things hadn't yet been seen. You know, Noah never saw rain, Noah never saw a flood, yet he was a man of faith, as the book of Hebrews describes him. Absolute faith. If God says it's going to rain, I don't know what it is, but it's going to happen, right? And then it says in Peter that the whole world was catastrophically destroyed, right? The Greek word is cataclysmos, which means absolutely devastated. So regardless of where the Garden of Eden had got to by the time of Noah, there was no trace of it after. Not in the Philippines, not in the Middle East, but we did what we do now. When we came first to Australia, we called a place Brisbane. Now, I can go to Brisbane in California. It's on the way to the Los Angeles airport, but it's named after the same bloke who came from the same place, right? So you'll find that these names go around the globe and we take them. We take the same rivers. We take all of those things. You can go to Eden in Australia if you like. It's on the south coast of New South Wales. It's beautiful. I can see why they called it Eden, but it's not the original one. So that's what you've got to watch when you say, is Eden connected to the Philippines? The answer is no. And Cardinal Sin, who used to be there, you know, it's a funny name to have for a cardinal, but it didn't mean sin as we see it in their language. So language is fascinating, but there's no Edenic remnants left in the Philippines.
Ty, I hope that was helpful.
Oh, it was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your call. 1-800-316-316. We'll squeeze in as many calls as we can. Let's hear from Richard in Alstonville in New South Wales. Hi, Richard.
Hi, guys. Just two questions. With the first question, really quickly, looking with the Israel and Palestinian conflict, I don't know if you know anything about where the Palestinian people originally come from. Something to do with the Roman Empire when they occupied Israel. Can you shed any light on that?
Not a huge amount of light because, as you know, most of those racial groups have been bought in, sent out, kicked out, bought back. It's like when I go through Europe, I get amazed that I can still find villages that are Saxon. Right, they were shipped there by a conqueror from somewhere else who just wanted them shifted so they could be a buffer to another fight. Now, this has happened time and time again, the last major shift being the one that got the Israelis back into Egypt. Oh, sorry, not into Egypt, back into the Middle East there in what we now call Israel. And, of course, the conflict has been since then. But as to the exact origin of the Gazans who you're asking about, they would claim they've been there forever. The Israelites, and in fact, there's a funny joke, and it really is more than a joke, when Yasser Arafat and the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, the same one, were having a conflict, and Netanyahu said, well, they've been here selling knickknacks on the border for thousands of years and robbing us. And Yasser Arafat said, we weren't even here thousands of years ago. My point exactly, says Netanyahu. Right, so there's a historic conflict here as to where that actual group came from. Big Lebanese group, all sorts of things there. So sorry, can't give you a specific answer on that one.
Richard, thank you so much for your call. Let's take another call. Una is in Tasmania. Hey, Una, welcome.
Thank you very much. Hi, hello to both of you. A quick question, please, about Noah cursing his son Ham. I've been told that the African people came from Ham. This caused me a bit of grief, being an African myself. But could you shed a bit of light on that curse and whether it's still relevant today? Because looking at the state of Africa, you know, it hurts my heart.
Yeah. Can I encourage you to specifically read the account after the flood when Noah had been drunk and naked, right? Now, it appears that something happened to the climate during the flood or after the flood, and that this was an unexpected phenomena, that Noah could get drunk. Whether the genes for alcohol had been changed or the environment changed, the sunlight, we just don't know. God never condemns him for being the first drunkard recorded in history and naked on the floor or on his paddle he was lying on as a bed. Ham comes in, Japheth comes in, Shem comes in. Now, Ham and Japheth poke fun at Dad. Ham particularly does something which is not specified. Whether he poked fun at his nudity or whether he interfered with Noah sexually, we just don't know. All sorts of suggestions. But when Noah wakes up, he realises what Ham had done. Now, we're never told how he realised that, but it implies that there was something physical there that told him something had been done. Now, when you have a think about it, the offence that's involved, respect your fathers. Honour your fathers is God's standard, right? It's fallen apart today, even in Christian families, but honour your father. Holy Father, Heavenly Father first, then your earthly father. They didn't do that. So you then find that here's the situation. Noah, as a father, had a problem with his son. So what should Dad do? He'd been asleep. The interesting thing is, as you read the story, Noah did not curse Ham. Noah cursed Ham's son. A father had been afflicted by his son, so he passes a curse on to his son that his son will become a curse to his dad. Right? So the curse was on Canaan, not on Ham. And Canaan, from all the knowledge we have, Canaan gave rise to the Lebanese, who are not black, right? Canaan gave rise to even the Chinese we've been talking about, right? None of whom are black or dark, none of whom inhabit Africa, right? So be relieved, you are not included in that curse. But for those who are Lebanese or Chinese and think, oh no, it's my problem now, forget about that, because the curse was that he will become a servant to his brother. Now you find that that curse was fulfilled when the Canaanites came to Moses and they tricked them. They bought old clothes, old bread, old donkeys, etc., and said, have mercy on us, have mercy on us. And the Israelites fell for it. Instead of praying, they fell for it. And then when they found that they'd been tricked, they said, from now on, you will be our slaves. Now, the curse that was put on Canaan was actually fulfilled when Moses enslaved the people of Canaan at that time, and it no longer applies to any of them. Right, so there you are, over and done with. Get out and preach the gospel to all of your black brothers and sisters, because the problem is not their black skin, but their black hearts.
Una.
Thank you so much. God bless you, and God bless the Lebanese and the Chinese as well. God
Amen.
bless everybody, and the white people, and the black people. God bless everyone.
Good on you, Una. Hey, we have to draw a close to our conversation. We've been talking about the Chinese people and the connection of the Chinese back through India, back to Canaan, back to Ham, the son of Noah. And interestingly, isn't it, that if we could trace ourselves back to any of these early peoples, we're tracing ourselves all the way back to Adam and Eve. And of course, some will say, and we haven't got time to enlarge on this, but some will say, and I had a guest on just late last year who was saying can trace his own family tree back to Adam and Eve because he can trace it back to a connection to the British royal family, who have no doubt the best genealogists who are tracing their ancestry back to Adam and Eve. Wonderful getting your insights once again today, John Mackay. You mentioned a seminar, the 20th and 21st of April in Gales in Brisbane, western side of Brisbane, just out towards Ipswich, and you're going to be talking about some of these things we're discussing today.
Saturday the 20th and Sunday the 21st at Camira, the Camira Assembly. So look that up. It'll be on our website in the next few days.
And for listeners, yes, creationresearch.net, and no doubt there'll be some articles. No doubt there could be video content, all sorts of good resource to talk about the sorts of things that we're discussing today and many, many, many other topics. Creationresearch.net. There's also a website for askjohnmackay.com. You can see John on YouTube. Just do a search on YouTube, John Mackay, the Creation Guy, Creation Research. Follow him on Facebook. You can follow him on all sorts of different social media. The encouragement is to do that. But the website, creationresearch.net. And as I understand it, John, things are thriving around the world in these different outposts.
Busy.
You know, let's just say, Tasmania. Well, it won't call Tasmania an outpost, but that's thriving. But you've got America. In northern Alabama, you've got an outfit that's happening in England, the English Museum doing great, and there's always a need for some volunteers.
Certainly is
and
true.
So,
and replacement youth.
Okay.
Just like you facing. Yeah.
That's it. So replacement youth. I mean, John, I think you'd be happy to talk to a few people who might want to actually move into some opportunities to be able, and if you feel like you've got a real affinity for talking about creation and evolution, you want to learn from the best, my encouragement is to connect with John Mackay. Creationresearch.net. John, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us once again today on 2020.
Good to see you.